Hello there, how are you doing today? Let me ask you a question before I get into this interview. How many of you use Windows platform as your developer platform? How many of you are sysadmins or developers or operators? Chances are, if I look at the Stack Overflow numbers, Windows is still, one of the most popular platform among developers, and Linux follows that. So chances are that most of you are using Windows for work. What is even more interesting is that if you look at public cloud like Microsoft Azure or AWS or Google Compute Platform, most of the machines are running Linux there. When you use Windows as your platform to develop, but your target system is Linux, it becomes kind of hard to manage your Linux workloads from Windows machines. So most developers used to resort to either dual booting with the Linux or run some other applications as a workaround so that they can get access to Linux tools and utilities. Both have their own problems. So if you're running a VM, you have a lot of overhead. If you're running some other application, then of course you don't get the native capabilities. So Microsoft has been working on kind of bringing these Linux utilities to the Windows platform. Recently they worked with Canonical, and they came up with something called WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux. It's out of beta now, so now you can run on any Windows 10 system after Creators Update. And what is interesting about WSL is that it's subsystem, Windows subsystem for Linux. So you get access to all Linux utilities and tools natively on Windows 10. So I can run SSH, I can rsync files, I can connect to my server and do all the things. Once I'm SSH'd into that system, then I can do everything that I would be doing either way. So they have been working on it, and they have been adding a lot of capabilities to that platform. At the same time, Microsoft is also bringing the Linux containers to Windows. So I met Taylor Brown, who has been involved with this project. This interview was done at DockerCon in Denmark. So I was in Denmark last month. That's where this interview was done. So let's take you back in time and let's talk to Taylor.
So I'm Taylor Brown. I'm a lead program manager in the Windows-based team. A lot of people probably know me from the work we've done on containers. So I've been the PM lead who's brought Windows containers around to the world. But now I'm also working on WSL and really looking after our developer ecosystem, helping developers be productive with Windows.
Yeah, because last time when we met, we talked about Linux container in Windows, the whole hypervisor. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about what progress has been made over all these?
Yeah, so we just shipped it. So as of actually just yesterday, Windows Server version 1709 and Windows 10 Fall Creator Update went live to the world, and that has all of the platform pieces necessary for Linux containers on Windows. So now we're working on finishing up the work in Docker and Containerd to make that generally available to everyone. So earlier today we actually did a whole session with one of our architects talking about how that all works and what are all the pieces necessary for it. And so yeah, it's available now.
And I was talking to a lot of people in the Linux world when WSL came.
Yeah.
I talked to Marshall Worth, and then I talked to Richard Brown from OpenSUSE, that how does it affect Linux in general? Because now you don't have to run Linux desktop to be able to use those utilities. And his point was, we don't care. All it matters for the customer is distribution is just one tool in our big giant toolbox. So as long as, and they think of it as that it will kind of expand reach of Linux to a lot of developers who were either not using it or, so from your point of view, how do you look at it?
Yeah, I look at it along a lot of the same lines. So I think we've seen people using MacBooks quite a bit because of the availability of the Bash tool set and based on kind of FreeBSD, right? One of the things I'm kind of excited about with WSL is that we're even using closer to what production environments would use for Linux, right? because it is the exact Linux binaries, the ELF formatted from the distros. Now we have SUSE and Canonical and Fedora available in the Windows Store, so people can use whatever distro they prefer with those tools, with whatever package manager they like. And it's exactly the same thing they're going to have in production when they go to the cloud. What I found is as I'm using Kubernetes and Azure more and more, and I'm using more hybrid Linux Windows workloads, I find myself living in Bash, right? And for someone who's grown up with Windows and really been part of the Windows team for a long time, it was a little bit of a switch for me. It was kind of back to some older roots, but I'm just way more productive when I can use the native tools along with those different environments, right? So now we've got Linux containers and Windows containers. I can use Bash to interact with the Linux containers natively. I can use Bash to spin up Windows containers. So I've kind of got this great world where I can use all the tools together. One of the things we've been working on quite a bit is making the experience of running Windows apps from Bash better. So when I launch code, for example, does it know what directory it's really in? So today, we mount the C drive, D drive into WSL with like /mount C. So if I open a file in there, Visual Studio Code's like, where did this thing come from? So we've been working on enlightening some of those paths to give it a better experience for saying, oh, I know how to transpose these directories back and forth. So that integration becomes stronger and stronger, which just makes me more productive, it makes other people more productive. It's just a really, I think, a good experience.
Right. I'm not sure whether this is right or wrong, but I mean, I'm a user too, you know.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed was, and as I said, no, I have not checked the beta because it was announced and I flew here. That, for example, you know, in native Linux, I can mount a drive, I can run dd command to flash, you know, a drive. So those kind of things are still in the work, or they are not supported yet?
You can mount a drive.
You can mount, yeah, but yeah, you cannot use the lsblk command to check the USB, all the connected USB devices yet, right?
That one's probably not fully implemented. We're adding syscall implementations pretty much daily at this point. So earlier today, John was talking about, like last week, he did a whole bunch of work to get clone working. Some of the clone syscalls, like we just keep adding more and more syscalls to WSL, and over time, you know, we will get to a point where we'll have probably the majority of them implemented.
Right.
It actually turns out it's not that difficult for a lot of them. We just have to find the right kind of parodies and proxies across.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the OS fundamentals between you know, Windows, Linux, and even other operating systems at the very core bottom edge of it aren't that different. Right? You get a memory manager, you've got scheduling, you've got thread contexts, so you just have to figure out how to map those things across.
Right. And when you say that you are still working on these things, so are you working like within Microsoft, or you're working with Canonical or Red Hat or SUSE to kind of?
A lot of the syscalls we have to do in the WSL Pico process, so we have to do those internally.
Okay.
But we are engaging a lot more with the Linux vendors on various other pieces and the community as a whole. So for example, we're looking at how to make graphics better for Linux VMs.
Okay.
So if I'm running a VM, I can have a better experience using Hyper-V with it.
Okay.
The way that we are looking at doing that is with XRDP. So can we go work with the XRDP community and maintainers and just make XRDP better? Because if we can do that, then it's better for everyone. So now even if I'm running Linux in Amazon or Google, for example, I could remote into that and have a better experience, right?
Right.
So it's this area where we can be beneficial to ourselves, very clearly, but we can benefit the community too.
Right.
And what was kind of fun about that one is that when we approached a couple of the Linux vendors, they were like, oh, wait, you want to work with us on this? Like, yeah, that would be great.
So was it a positive experience or a negative experience?
Yeah, so far it's been pretty positive. We're still investigating it. We're still looking at, is this the right approach, or should we be doing something else? You know, is there a better protocol to be using? But so far it looks like XRDP is looking like a pretty positive investment.
I was talking to Richard Brown. He's the chairman of OpenSUSE board, and when you work with, I don't want to name any Linux vendor, but when you work with those vendors, because you are putting their distribution in your store, right? So what kind of challenges you face, you know, That's why I don't want to name anybody, but let's say whatever XYZ.
Yeah.
It could be branding, it could be trademarks, whatever. So how do you kind of handle that? How smooth was the process?
Well, the first part of it is that it's really them putting their distro in the store, right? We're not taking anybody's distro and just saying, we're going to do this, right? It's really them approaching us and saying, we want to extend our user base. We want to engage this community. So in a lot of ways, it's actually been them coming around and asking for it. So it's been an incredibly positive experience, at least from my end. I experienced it a lot when we worked on Linux containers for Windows. So we kind of expected that there was going to be some hesitance from some of the Linux vendors about, do we really want to put a Linux kernel out? And we were blown away. Like everybody wanted to participate in it. And it kind of showed me that, two things. One, people are really excited about these kind of experiences. But it also really reinforced how great that community is. Like they aren't worried about their brand in terms of users. They expect that, we're SUSE, this is what we do different, and our users love that part of it. And okay, we're Canonical, our users expect this, and they love that about us. And they're very healthy with, yes, there's different options, but that's what makes this community great.
And when it comes to support, where do users get support from? Because one piece of the puzzle is Microsoft, and then other is either Canonical or SUSE or.
So SUSE or Canonical or whoever your vendor of choice is. In the case of WSL, for example, they're providing support for all the user mode binaries. This with the fall creator update, we removed the beta tag from WSL, so now it's a fully supported feature. So we support the kind of that syscall translation layer. So there's a partnership there that's required for someone to say, okay, we've got a bug in this layer. Is that a bug in the user mode binary? In which case, Canonical or SUSE or Fedora or any other distro that came along would need to make a patch for it. Or is it a bug underlying the syscall? And so we've been working with the community through GitHub, really, to help give them tools and learn the processes to identify those issues. And we've gotten pretty good at it at this point.
Okay. But none of this is commercial support, right? This is just a support through forums, or?
No. So now, as we've removed the beta tag, you can open a case for Windows 10 or even Windows Server and get support for WSL.
Yeah. So who will be the Microsoft or the vendor?
Again, it's kind of this partnership where if it's a user mode area, then it would be the vendor of the distro.
But user doesn't have to worry about who he's talking to, right? Or who she is talking to?
Generally what we're seeing is people go to the vendor.
Okay.
And then if they say like, it's probably a syscall, then they'll come back to Microsoft. What we've done on the container side of it is that we've partnered with Docker, Docker Inc., to provide commercial support for the Docker engine. And we've kind of turned that support channel around, so a customer can call Microsoft, and then that'll ultimately get to Docker if we need to. We'll engage on the back end.
Yeah.
We're open to those kind of arrangements. It's really a matter of what customers and developers expect. WSL is a little bit different because people are using those distros and that experience. That's their kind of their home base.
Right.
They're like, I'm a Canonical user. I like Ubuntu. That's where I start. So it makes more sense in most cases for them to start with support from Ubuntu or SUSE or Fedora, and then we kind of end up being the back end of that. On containers, even though they're used to using Docker, that user base, especially the IT Pro kind of user base, is used to just calling Microsoft support. So we tried to make sure that they had a really good experience doing that, if that's the way they wanted to get support for it.
And what's the point of moving it to server and Azure WSL?
So the point of moving it to server was really customer demand. So we had people who said, hey, I want to run bash scripts, especially as we brought Linux containers in. I just want to run the same bash script I've got to debug something on server. And it just wasn't technically difficult to do. It was pretty much changing a few flags and it showed up in the build. So that customer excitement around it and customer demand, plus being a fairly straightforward thing to do, just totally made sense. Now, Azure having the Cloud Shell, that just has been an awesome experience. Right now I can just go into the Azure gallery, I can drop right into a shell, I can do my work, all of my files are saved. If I go home, they're present there as well. It's just a pretty natural experience.
And you are also doing some work within PowerShell too. So what's going on there?
So PowerShell is now open source. It has been for 2 years almost now. So we've got PowerShell available for Linux, PowerShell available for Windows. You can now download it. We actually separated NanoServer. We separated PowerShell out of NanoServer, so it's available as a layer now. So users can opt in or out of PowerShell, save the space if they don't need it in production, late bind it if they want it. So that's been pretty fun. Now we're adding SSH support. So one of the cool features in Fall Creator Update is you can actually get SSH server and client as a feature on demand. So that's the full open SSH ported to run on Windows now. So more and more tools are just kind of showing up.
But if you have Bash, or WSL, why would you even?
And that's a great question. So the server side of it's pretty valuable because now I can run a server on it. And on the client side, we do have users who aren't using WSL yet.
Right.
I say yet because I think they all will at some point. But if they want to just be able to SSH into something, hey, that tool is just going to be there. It should just be part of the experience for them. So I'm all about giving people options and let them vote with their feet. Where do they want us to be investing? Yeah.
Since now it's out of beta, so now what is the big features that users can expect from WSL?
So a lot of it's going to be, we've got a lot of work to do on file system performance and still adding syscall features. We've got a lot of work to do around networking, like getting to IP tables and getting some of those features to a point where they're really usable. So they can expect to see a lot more of that kind of work coming down the pipe. We want to make daemon sets work. So can I run that SSH server? Can I actually just run that from WSL as a background process? So that's important work. I talked a little bit about the code experience earlier. How do we make it so that Windows apps can understand Bash and WSL? So for example, all the extensions that run in Visual Studio Code, maybe I want those to run under WSL. So maybe the node debugger can just know, I've got WSL, let me just run all of my node workloads under WSL. So those kind of integrations are going to be really important, I think, to really make the experience complete.
Okay. And so by the version, there is no any versioning number of WSL, right?
It's part of Windows, so it's 1709 is the version we just shipped.
Okay.
So year and then month. And then we're on this 6-month or semi-annual cadence now.
Okay.
I would definitely encourage developers to also be on the insider track, whether it's slow or fast, because we're adding features all the time.
Right.
So there's already new work. We just started shipping insider builds. So the dev team has been hard at work already on new features. So you'll start to see those show up like immediately in the insider builds.
And is WSL open source or is like still kind of
so the user mode side of it, because it's part of the distros, is open source, of course. The insertable implementation, the syscall translation, it's still part of Windows. It's something we're still thinking about. And I think you could see a world where that would be very valuable open source. But we're not at a point where we're ready to do that quite yet.
Right, but eventually, I hope everything will be open source. Once the business model changes,
we were finding a lot of value from tools like the work we're doing with Docker and making that open source. Right? The guest compute service, which powers the Linux container work, is all open source now. Open sourcing PowerShell, .NET open sourcing, and the more I think we see kind of the value of the community coming around that, the easier it is to say, hey, here's a piece of functionality that should be open source. And we get benefit, community gets benefit, it kind of works well for everyone.
Yeah, so all these people who are working on open source and just freeze Microsoft in where it is so that we just keep seeing more and more and more open source before something else changes.
No, it's been, a lot of
it gets exciting, even for us, because we have been following Microsoft as a company and we have seen the culture changed. So it's kind of, exciting, to see more and more open source happening, because kind of open source is the de facto software development model.
It's been exciting for us, and I talk about it here, like several years ago when I would want to go find a user, that was hard to do. I'd have to go track down someone and figure out who's the right user and talk to them. Now I can just go to GitHub,
right?
And all my users are right there. I can go to Twitter and ask someone like, hey, do you think we should implement a feature this way or that way? Discuss, right? And that makes our design process so much better because it's actually informed by the people who are going to use it as opposed to a small subset of them.
Exactly, yeah.
Which, sometimes you get lucky, but a lot of times you'd find out like, oh, that person had an opinion about how this should work that didn't really match with everyone else, but we're a year down the road. So it really does make it a lot better.
Right.
At least in my opinion.
Yeah, and I fully agree, because the feedback loop totally changes, because you have people who are looking at the code and they can, and I mean, there may be a lot of bright people who don't work for Microsoft, you certainly get, from.
Oh, I'm sure there are. Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of good value out of it.
Yeah, right? So, I mean, anything else you would like to touch upon, or we kind of touched about all the?
I think we talked about a lot of the fun stuff. I mean, it's just been a lot of fun working on all of this cool technology and then seeing how excited people are. This week has been really good. We've had a ton of people really excited about Windows containers, which is great. Also, people really excited about running Linux containers. People who are super excited about WSL. So, it just kind of shows how excited people are to be, part of this community and working with Microsoft, and it's always just fun to see.
Thanks for your time once again, and hopefully next time we'll see and you will elevate your role in Microsoft and acquire some more divisions.
I'm just having fun. That's the best part.
Yeah, if you're doing open source, you'll always have fun.